Jerry Sadowitz is a comedy god. He's loved by so many people despite being quite an underground comedian that I'm guessing quite a lot of people who are watching haven't actually heard of before. And there's a reason behind that, which I'll tell you later on. He is, by a country mile, my favourite comedian of all time. He continues to be the most offensive comedian I or anyone else has ever seen in their lifetime. And to top it all off, he's also one of the world's best magicians and completely mesmerises his audience on 2 levels in every single show he does. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Anti-Social Media, well, listening technically. This is mostly an audio recording with very little visuals about Jerry Sadowitz and how cancelling Jerry Sadowitz is actually, technically, a blessing in disguise. Okay? Normally I take the piss out of online culture, Twitter, Facebook, etc. and really rip the piss out of the very worst parts of that culture. But today I'm going to take the piss out of the comedy world because sometimes they fuck up, but this time, spoiler alert, it actually works in Jerry's favour. Now, if you haven't heard the news yet, you've been living under a rock. Basically, Jerry is up in Edinburgh at the Fringe Festival, and the Pleasance is one of the big 4 groups of venues. They've got loads of venues, and they are at the EICC, the International Centre, and they had put on Jerry Sadowitz for 2 nights, and he just did 1 night, I think it was last night. And his show is billed as being the most offensive thing ever. It says it's literally called Not For Anybody or Not For Anyone. And there are so many warnings out there, and he's got a history of being offensive. You would think that people would pick up on that. However, he has been cancelled for the 2nd day of the 2-day run. The venue wants nothing to do with it, and the bloke who runs the venue says, and I quote, "The Pleasance is a venue that champions freedom of speech, and we do not censor comedians' material. While we acknowledge that Jerry Sadowitz has often been controversial, the material presented at his first show is not acceptable and does not align with our values. This type of material has no place on the festival, despite it appearing on the festival for the last 20, 30, 40 years. So basically there's a lot of hypocrisy there. They're free speech merchants who have cancelled someone, and a lot of people are up in arms about this, of course. And the whole thing is really weird as a fan of comedy. We are seeing this from time to time, probably a bit more regularly than we're used to, but it is obviously amplified by social media as well. And it is weird, but it's also excellent news for Jerry, and allow me to explain in excruciating detail. You think after the many decades that he's been offending as many people as possible, venues might have cottoned on to the fact that Jerry Sadowitz is offensive. I am someone who would be described as woke by people with small brains and or small penises who are unable to argue anything and just put a label on something instead. But despite being woke, I love Jerry's vitriol. I've seen him perform between 10 to 15 times. There's a chance it may be over 20 times. It's hard. I've lost count, basically. I've seen him so many times over the years, and a lot of his audience are actually left-wing types of people. Loads of them, in fact. Probably the majority. Now, I won't be using the meaningless word woke to describe what happened to Jerry Sadowitz. I will simply call it stupidity on the venue's part. And I'm pretty sure this isn't a giant cancel culture conspiracy against comedy. It's more like a massive fuck-up by a venue who should have known better. A mistake that has had completely the opposite effect of cancel culture, by the way, and that's really important to remember because it's propelled Jerry Sadowitz back onto people's radars. Now, as I was coming up with formulating something to write and to read out about Jerry Sadowitz, at the time he was the number one read news story on the BBC website, and then after I had a little sleep, he was still at number 4. He has had every comedian in the world jump to his defence, and he has reminded me at the time that I forgot to book a ticket for his show in October, so I immediately went and booked it. So it's had a good positive effect so far, you know. And also, all the shows in the future are very likely to sell out now. He's become even more controversial than he was before. Unlike the Ricky Gervaises of the world who pretend to be silenced during their Netflix special broadcast to millions of homes, Jerry Sadowitz has actually had his free speech fucked with, albeit temporarily. I've lost count of the amount of times I've read tweets, read forum posts and general comments asking, whatever happened to Jerry Sadowitz? Well, he's been gigging for decades with minimal promotion, because he wants to offend just the right people, and he wants to keep offending those people too. There's a good reason why he has had his stuff, well, he himself removes all of his stuff from YouTube, and why he's never released a DVD. He knows his audience. Occasional walkouts in his show are manageable and a highlight of the show, but whole theatres leaving early is not a sustainable business model. Hence what I just said about him having a particular audience. There are downsides. Not being on most people's radar for the last few decades sometimes results in shows that are sparsely attended. I've been at a few of those. But he has just enough of a fan base to keep gigging. What he didn't bank on ever in his career, I'd imagine, was an actual venue who booked him, knowing everything about him, being offended by his musings on stage. However, this should result in the end of half-full theatres for Jerry, I hope. My fingers are crossed. He will see a return of fans who forgot all about him. And, those who never got round to seeing him. Maybe he wasn't gigging near them at the time or ever. Or just no opportunities to see him, They're going to come and see him now. So before you jump on the cancel culture bandwagon, consider all sides of the story and count your blessings that this stupid decision by a venue has just added a few more years of material to Jerry's hefty catalogue of filth and a few more years of touring, and it has made the October gig that I will be attending very soon even more of an event than it previously was. So, say it quietly, but this could be the best thing to happen to comedy for quite some time. I'm going to say it, well done Edinburgh Fringe. Seriously. Now, if you want to see what possibly offended the venue so much, I'm going to link below in the description box to an article from Chortle website, which is a comedy website, where they have a description of what Jerry said on stage. He made some comments about Rishi Sunak, described him in a particular way, shall we say. I can't mention any of the things that he said on stage on YouTube because I will have this video removed from YouTube. They're also, just because I'm mentioning Jerry Sadowitz, he may get this video removed too, so I hope you've watched this immediately after it was published. But, he said some things which were offensive, but of course, taken out of context when it's reported on. And there's the case of the fact that there's lots of irony involved in his act and so forth. And there's a case of Jerry Sadowitz himself saying we shouldn't analyse his comedy, and I will link to another article from Chortle that he wrote many moons ago, which you can't really find on Google without searching in page 50 of the results, where he takes a piss out of people analysing his comedy, and it's well worth a read. I highly recommend it. Just scroll down and you'll see that. Also, it is alleged that he took his penis out and waved it in a woman's face. Now, this isn't the first time he's got a dick out on stage. He used to have a routine in the 1980s where he got his knob out on Red Nose Day, which is, I won't explain what that is for the kids, but Red Nose Day, he got his knob out, started wanking it and said something like, "How's that for comic relief?" Good joke. Everybody laughs. Now, I doubt he waved his dick in one person's face, seeing as he was on stage and there's an entire audience in front of him. Very hard to pinpoint him, target. He may have done. But that is, again, everything's out of context here, so we can't really read too much into it. Now, I know all of his jokes, okay? I've seen him fucking for 2 decades worth of his shows, okay? And what's often forgotten in discussions about offensive comedy is Jerry is also one of the best magicians there's ever been. And so you see 2 shows for the price of 1, which is handy because tickets at the moment are 30 fucking quid. Then you got the train fare on top of that and food and drink and maybe a taxi home. Basically, it's worth every penny when you've spent a lot of money in a cost of living crisis. But I digress. I haven't seen him since COVID, right? I also had to move halfway across the country because I couldn't afford to live anywhere anymore, and lost my job and stuff, and I didn't want to be homeless. Just small things like that. And I was no longer within easy reach of London's Leicester Square Theatre, where I can see him like several times a year. And I've missed it. I missed it a lot, and I'm glad that I am sort of near a venue I can see him in October. But the problem is, as I've mentioned earlier, it's the pricks who stand up for Jerry in this situation. They're right to say, "Oh, he shouldn't have been cancelled," and this is a very bizarre free speech issue here. It just doesn't make any sense. We're for free speech, but we're against free speech. And you've got people, like Graham Linehan writing an article about Jerry Sadowitz, in which he uses the title of the article and the very last paragraph of the article. He uses the whole situation to bash trans children again and trans people in general. It's quite a sight. I won't link to it because I don't want to give him any more traffic, but it's bizarre this way this man's mind thinks. That's the kind of person we're dealing with here. And I wouldn't say I was a particular super fan of Jerry Sadowitz, but I do know one who I've met before, and she did mention that due to the news, it's good to see Jerry Sadowitz back on the BBC at last. That's quite a good line. But in my opinion, the only person who should cover the word or vague concept of wokeism, or even a vaguer concept of cancel culture, is someone who is smart, who is funny, and who is scathing. And I'm confident that man is Jerry Sadowitz, and he'll be able to come up with a blistering routine about all the Edinburgh Fringe cunts that have wronged him. But everyone else needs to sort of nip it in the bud, right? I know that it kind of includes me here, and that's fine, you know. Only Jerry is allowed to pretend woke and cancel culture are bad things and exist, here to destroy us all. Because if you take those concepts seriously, you instantly become boring, and you only appeal to GB News viewers, and you're just a prick. You're just dullard, you know. Which leads me to my final point. After decades of cultivating just the right audience to play to, with just the right amount of walkouts to have maximum comedy effect for those who get his jokes, it's always been a worry that Jerry Sadowitz could easily attract the wrong type of punter to his shows. We've seen it before with Al Murray, whose character is basically a Nigel Farage type character, who some audience members came along and took at face value. They loved him attacking foreigners without ever seeing that it's actually a piss take of xenophobia and piss take of bigotry as a whole. I've seen smatterings of those kinds of people at Jerry Sadowitz gigs before. People who don't see the irony in his so-called racist rants, or cheer the really dark stuff because they think Jerry is on their side. You know the type of people I'm on about, don't you? When I say the GB News sort of crowd, it's the kind of people who claim they should be able to say whatever they want without pushback or censorship, whilst also at the same time forbidding anyone from calling them gammon because it hurts their feelings. The type of people who call for boycotts when you say something that they don't like politically. Oh, I'm never going to eat Ben and Jerry's again because you're slightly against immigration and you care for the environment. Let's boycott them. That's cancel culture, my friend. And it's basically hypocrites are going to come to the show and they're going to laugh at the wrong bits. Or maybe I'm just overthinking this. You never know. But I'm moving away from my main point, which I'll reiterate once again. Jerry Sadowitz has been cancelled temporarily, but this will make his career so much bigger and better. And this is so good because he's getting on a bit, old Jerry. He's 61 years old now, and there's going to be a time he's going to hang up his top hat and his cigar. And this might just give him a little bit of a push to do a few more years of touring and make a bit more cash as well. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to this. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a ramble. Remember, I've got videos about various comedians on my channel, including a series about Andrew Lawrence, another comedian who thinks he's offensive but does not get it right at all, especially when compared to Jerry Sadowitz, and various other videos about awful people online as well. So do subscribe, and if you do like this for some reason, you want to throw a few pounds my way, then my PayPal link is below, which encourages me to make more videos /podcasts. So thank you very much for watching, listening, or whatever, and goodbye.